Hey there, this is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners. Welcome to the Exit Readiness podcast. I'm here with co-host Walter Dial, CPA and tax partner at GRF CPAs and Advisors in Bethesda, Maryland. We also have with us today my partner at Ennis Legacy Partners, Corby McGordon. Our mission here on the podcast is to provide you, the business owner, with subject matter expertise on topics pertaining to building sellable or transferable business value and then planning your eventual exit from the business. We want to help you build a business that's sellable and then exit successfully on your own terms and conditions. So guys, would I be right in saying that I'm not exactly an expert on programming, coding language, tech language kind of stuff?
You're pretty good with the language, but actually doing it, that's another story.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, actually, that's encouraging. I'm pretty good.
Fake it pretty well.
Wow.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
it's faking it at this point, but yeah.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, that hurts. But you know what? You're not actually real good at it either there, WD.
Sure.
But you know, we all know what it's like to be in a conversation with one or more high-end tech folks when they start throwing around tech language and jargon and as if we know what they're talking about. And I guess it's true. I guess we do know more and more what they're talking about now because we work with so many of these people. But it's been a process, hasn't it? Stuff like code-free interface or acronyms, ETL, API, CSVs, whatever it is. I can still start to get that far away look in my eyes when that happens at times. Well, I think we can tend to do the same thing, can't we, with terms from our industry, like GRATs, ESOPs, EBITDA, or QOE. Okay, so we can at times wrongly assume that owners know what these things mean as well. So today what we're going to do is we're going to take some time to define a term or phrase that we use a lot, or an acronym that we use a lot that not all owners are familiar with, and yet it is extremely important to understand in building a business that is sellable and exiting with success, and that is QOE, or quality of earnings. So that's today's topic: due diligence and quality of earnings analysis. And so, Walter, let's start with you with just a definition of what it is. Define quality of earnings, and then start to talk about why it's important. And then we'll start to talk about the due diligence process and how it plays into a due diligence process and where it's important there too.
Okay, great. So here's the way I look at quality of earnings. When you purchase a business or you sell a business, usually the value can somehow be stated as a multiple of EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Or in a smaller business, it might be a multiple of SDE, which is seller's discretionary earnings. So as you can see, you've got a measure of income or earnings times a multiple, and that's giving you the value that you're paying for the company. So it's very important to the buyer that that revenue stream is what they anticipate it's going to be. So anytime someone purchases a business, they're buying the future cash flow of that business. So it's critical to them that they have an understanding of what that future cash flow is really going to be. That's where a quality of earnings analysis comes into play. That the quality of earnings analysis helps them to better quantify the future cash flow of the business.
Yep. Okay. Corb, would you add anything to that? Or
Yeah, again, just in slightly different language, perhaps. It's, a buyer is buying the future cash. And it's a matter of how certain are they that will happen, given that we're looking ahead. So what you do today and what you've done, if it's consistent, it's more believable than if it's inconsistent.
All right, so then now let's talk about how this intersects with a due diligence process. If I'm going to buy, you guys have a business and I'm going to buy it today, I'm going to have a due diligence process to check out everything about your business. And quality of earnings is going to be one of those things, right? So what am I going to be looking for in my due diligence process? And actually, Walter, I know you've gone through this a couple of times recently. What are some of the things that that you've seen but what am I going to be looking for in my due diligence process in regard to quality of earnings?
Yeah. So just in the past, I guess 3 months, I've had 2 clients go through a sale of their business, and they've gone through the due diligence process, and both buyers were private equity firms. That means they are the top of the heap when it comes to buy side transactions. They know what they're doing. This is what they do professionally. They've got a team in place. So this is where we've talked about in previous podcasts, where our clients are usually a one-time seller. You know, they've built up a business and they're selling it. If you're sitting across the table from a PE group who's buying your company, they've got a huge advantage over you, unless you've surrounded yourself with a quality team, like we always talk about. So
they got a little bit of experience doing it, and a little bit of firepower on their side of the table.
Yeah. So specifically when it comes to due diligence, you know, there's CPA firms out there. I mean, the big 4 do this, but usually what I see is kind of the next tier firms like Grant Thornton and McGladrey, who are great firms, big firms, national firms. They have due diligence groups within their firms that all they do is due diligence. And from the seller standpoint, it can seem like the goal of due diligence is to find problems with the company that allows the buyer to reduce the price. And, you know, maybe there is some of that, but I think, like a PE group, a legitimate buyer, you know, they're willing to pay fair price. They're not trying to nickel and dime you. But legitimately, the goal of due diligence is that the buyer wants to make sure, on one hand, that there's nothing hidden in the closet. They don't want to buy your company and find out that there's some employee left 6 months ago and is getting ready to file a sexual harassment suit against you, or your ownership to assets. You really, you know, there's a competing patent out there or something like that. So it's a lot of due diligence in those areas. But the other big area we see, and I've seen specifically in these last 2 deals, is just the whole quality of earnings analysis. A lot of time and attention was devoted to that. And let me just give you a real simple example of how that could play out from my world, the CPA world. So, I have a very large tax practice. And the nice thing about tax work is that it's what we would call annuity work, meaning that every year, everybody has to file a tax return. And generally speaking, most people don't change their tax preparer. I mean, we probably have a 1% turnover rate every year just because people die or move or whatever. So my business would be considered, from a quality of earnings standpoint, my historical earnings are pretty reliable as you look into the future. Chances are, if I brought in X revenue on average for the last 3 years, you can pretty much count on that going forward. Contrast that with a CPA firm that specializes in forensic engagements. Now, they're going to probably have higher rates. They're going to be more profitable, but they've got to go find a new forensic engagement. So they finish a big one, they got to go find another one. They don't have what we would call annuity work. So their quality of earnings is going to be, it's not going to be as high as mine. And within that specialty, we're going to be able to take a look at their quality of earnings based on, like, for instance, if they've got a firm that has a number of professionals who have relationships with law firms that are consistently referring them business, for instance, that would be a high quality of earnings. if instead it's one guy and his best friend is a lawyer at some firm who refers him business, that's a low quality of earnings if that guy is leaving. So that's kind of what we mean by quality of earnings. So that's what I'm seeing, Pat. I'm seeing a lot of focus on quality of earnings analysis in the due diligence process.
So Walter, just to pull on that thread, even, say you have a mid-sized business that, they sell garage doors, or they, it's some other, non-service entity, and a lot of their sales are one-offs. How does the historical validation of their planning, i.e., if they've built budgets and they've attained budgets, they have processes defined as to how they market, how they sell, does that affect then, even in that, the non-annuity type business, does it affect the quality interpretation?
It definitely would. So if you have a history of strategic planning and budgeting, and you're consistently meeting those budget goals, that's going to be very powerful when a buyer comes and looks at your company. They're going to feel a certain level of comfort that they can rely on your projections. And you've got the historical data to back it up. That's very powerful indeed.
Yeah. Very good. Very good.
So in doing the due diligence, the forensic accountants, they're looking at not just revenue and sales, but also expenses.
Yeah, it's really, when you think of quality of earnings, so earnings is, just another way really to say cash flow in our context. So cash flow is impacted by the level of revenue and then the level of expenses. So both need to be examined in a quality of earnings analysis. I'm going to let Corby talk about the expense side, but let me just go through a few things on the revenue side. So one thing I talked about was, is the revenue recurring? Is it annuity type revenue? If it is, that's better than if it's not. One of the more obvious examples of this is a client who has contracts. If they've got renewable contracts that have a history of renewing, or they've got a contract that they're working on and they're in year 1 of 5 years, that type of thing, those are all really good. The gold standard, and I don't think I have any clients in this situation, maybe a few partially, but the gold standard is subscription income. The classic, someone's getting hit for $100 on their credit card every month. You don't even realize it, and they subscribe to something. They have to do something to turn it off. I mean, that's like the best of all worlds. So that's what we're talking about in quality of earnings. The other issue, and Pat, you've discussed this a lot, and I know in your work with clients, this is a big deal because, like you mentioned in the opening, there's business value and then there's transferable business value. So the one thing we see, and it ties into this quality of earnings, is if the business is owner centric, meaning the owner is the one who has the sales connections, that's going to hurt your quality of earnings, because any buyer is going to realize if this owner leaves, a lot of the business could walk out the door. So that's probably what we see the most in the businesses we work with, is there's just too much reliability on the owner to generate the business.
Yeah, wouldn't that be true too for any other key employee possibly, as well as if a business is too dependent on any one supplier?
Yep, for sure. Yeah. So,
or in any one customer. Did we talk about that? Diversity,
right, exactly.
Diversity of customer base.
Yeah, that's a big deal. So those all go into the quality of earnings analysis on the revenue side. And then there's a whole different factors you look at when it comes to the expense side. I'll let Corby talk about that.
Yeah, so I'm a financial analyst. I'm not an accountant. And when I look at a company's set of numbers, one of the first things I do is I want to see a picture of their income statement and the balance sheet over time, and look for consistency or inconsistency. And when you see a line of accounting that has stability and then has some unexplained variations, well, particularly if they're unexplained and the owner can't say, oh, well, that is because of X, bingo, alarm bells. Restructuring charts of accounts radically and moving big buckets of cost without explanation. Just consistency or inconsistency in the data throws up alarm bells. And then when you're valuing a company or analyzing its health, it's the cleanliness of reporting. So there are one-time expenses. You do a build out of something, et cetera, that very explainable, very understandable, very much related to the growth of the business. But then there are also the privileges of ownership, such as parking your car expenses in there and perhaps having family members on the payroll. Other perks of being an owner, which are legitimate from a business ownership perspective. But when you come down to an outsider looking at your business, you want to present the most consistent, stable picture of what does it take to run the business? What does it take to operate the business? And even there, every owner has value judgments where they may be just very generous in bonusing employees, et cetera. Even capturing that policy in the line of accounting and clearly saying that, I bonus generously, I'm above market here. Well, that at least is very clear and shows that even if the cash flow is maybe less than one would like, a buyer can adjust that and say, well, I'm just going to be a little less generous because there's more cash available. So clarity, consistency, and then cleanliness are probably the key issues here.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So as we wrap up, let's just maybe offer some best practices, if you will, to ensuring for owners who are listening, for ensuring that clarity, consistency, and cleanliness, as you put it, Corby, so that when they get to the point, like we just talked to, well, at least one client client this week who's got an LOI, and due diligence is the next process, is what's next if they sign it. How can they be confident in their quality of earnings going into that due diligence? Best practices in the months and the years leading up to an actual due diligence process to ensure clarity, consistency, and cleanliness. What are you guys going to tell them to do?
I think the mistake business owners can make is looking at due diligence as something that's going to happen once, like you said, once the LOI is signed.
Yeah.
They really need to be ahead of the curve. And what we talk about is basically doing sell side due diligence, meaning you run your company through the due diligence process before the buyer does. And again, like everything else in this process, the sooner you start, the better. Now, certainly some things are going to have to wait closer to the end, but you need to start doing things like Corby mentioned. If you're not budgeting, you need to start doing that because you want a track record of budgets and successfully meeting them. Pat, maybe you can talk a little bit. We've talked, I think, not sure we had a podcast about, but we've had guests who have talked about some of the legal aspects that go into sell side due diligence before the fact. You want me to cover that, or do you want to cover that?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So, the worst thing that can happen during due diligence is that something is discovered that catches you off guard, or the famous, well, I'm just hoping they don't find that because I guarantee you they will. So, you don't want to have surprises. And, the other thing that happens is you can have a great company and done a wonderful, everything is perfect almost. But once somebody discovers one thing, it's just human nature. They got to start thinking, what else is there? Mm-hmm. So it just starts to seed doubts in the buyer's mind, which is always dangerous. But one of the areas and Pat and I have seen this with clients, is just something as simple as reviewing who owns your company. I mean, we had somebody who went to sell their company, and it turned out all along they've been telling us they own the company. Well, it turned out, what was it, like 10 or 20 years earlier, they had given somebody like 1% of their company. And it's like, well, now you have a minority owner and they have rights.
Right.
So it's a nightmare. So you got to take care of that, long before you get to the due diligence table. And even things like, you just have a lawyer come in just to make sure all your legal agreements are updated, make sure you really own your property, especially intangible property. So, stuff like that. And then do your own quality of earnings. And the beauty of it is, and this again goes back to everything we say about exit planning is good business planning. So you go through a quality of earnings analysis on your own company, and you're gonna identify some weaknesses. Well, those are weaknesses that you can address right now to make your company easier to run, more profitable, and just better. Not to mention the fact it's going to have come sell time and due diligence time. So, we really encourage you to start early with just doing your own due diligence. You can take it piece by piece, especially if your sale is a few years off. But it's really beneficial to get ahead of the curve and not get caught with any surprises during the real due diligence process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's better to have it as an ongoing business practice, right? Rather than try to jam it into 60 days.
For sure.
Yeah, what actually comes to mind, we often talk in exit planning, a key value driver is policy and procedure. Well, policy and procedure includes things like, how do we book our expenses? How do we recognize revenue on something like, I worked in a software world for a while, and is it when they upload it? Is when they install it? Just documenting those things and then being consistent makes it very explainable. It makes the numbers consistent. And then routine management review. We always print these reports. We always assess this stuff. We always adjust course this way. And boy, if that's part of your rhythm, one, it's just good business practice. And two, when it comes time to have a seller walk in the door, you can just hand them the stack and go, here's history. This is what we do.
Yep.
Yeah, that's why it's good for listeners if they've got someone like us working for them. It's our strategy renovation value advisor engagement, where and this is really Corby who does this month in and month out. Part of that monthly meeting is a review of the financials, and so there's an opportunity to drill down into these things, the quality of earnings. So if you've got a business coach, if you've got maybe a CFO, if you're fortunate enough to have a CFO on staff or fractional CFO, then this is something you should be doing regularly, right? Every month, every quarter, even if it's every 6 months, but regularly. Would you guys agree with that?
Definitely.
Absolutely. And I would also say that if you have that outsourced person and they're providing you information, but you still don't quite get it, you still kind of feel like where we started, where they're talking jargon, we'll make them explain it to you in English. I've seen reports from outsourced financial people. I look at the numbers and there's a huge adjustment that radically changes profitability and no comment on the cover memo. And it's just like, what? You can't do that to an owner, and owners shouldn't accept that as acceptable. They've got to have an explanation.
Yeah, and along those lines, I think we've come a long way too, haven't we, Corby? and how we actually communicate these things with clients on a regular basis, and not just as we started the podcast, throw a bunch of jargon at them.
Yep.
Making sure that it's, as we like to say, defoliated and fully explained, and they're getting the information too that's going to help them run the businesses in a simple format.
Yep.
All right, any last thoughts, guys? This has been really good. Of course, you guys are great content guys.
Not good tech guys, but we're good content guys.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to this stuff.
Excellent.
Uh,
Okay. We'll take that.
Any closing thoughts or suggestions?
No, I think, again, I think the two main points I would make is start early and realize that, like we've been saying, any investment in this area, you're going to see a return immediately in the operations of your business, not just down the road when you sell the business.
Yeah. Yeah. And one other thought for any owner out there, if you're not sure where to start, just Google financial due diligence on a small business. You'll get a checklist and take a look at it and do that yourself. And where, if you don't understand, that's where you ask your accountant, bookkeeper, what does that mean? You're going to get educated and you're going to understand it and be able to start doing it.
Hey, Pat, just a funny little story. I was just on a Zoom with one of our previous podcast guests who referred me into a client he's working with. And we were talking today about, we're in the process of really trying to clean up the accounting at this company. And one of the things he mentioned, he said, yeah, early on, Pat sent me, I think it's like a due diligence list, but I look at it and we've got like 10% of it covered. But he said, but we're slowly chipping away at it. So, that's really good.
Yeah, well, and this is just one piece, what we've talked about today, quality of earnings, is just one piece of due diligence. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. If you go to our website and go to client testimonials, there's video testimonials there. One of the first ones, I think it is the first one, is a gentleman who, I think he starts out by saying something along the lines of, we had, and oh, by the way, he and his wife have successfully sold their business and living in Florida, enjoying life, and everything went great. But they had no idea everything that was going to be covered in a due diligence process. And so it is a lot. And this is just one piece of it. And so if you wait until someone's actually coming with LOIs, letter of intent, by the way, that acronym is letter of intent, you're going to have a whole lot to do in just a couple of months. And while you're doing that, you need to keep your eye on the ball in regard to your business. Your business can't lose a step, or it can impact the final offer. You've got to continue to drive revenue and do business and grow business and everything like that in the midst of the due diligence process. So wouldn't it make good business sense to have all these things budgeted in regard to time and financials over it, as Corby put it earlier, policies and procedures and just how you're doing business. So we've encouraged you to get started on this early, just like we encourage you to get started on everything having to do with building a transferable business or planning your exit early. It's going to take longer than you think. And to begin planning now, you can either reach Walter at 301-951-9090 or Corby and I at 301-859-0860. We both offer initial, no obligation, introductory, exploratory conversations. And you can access resources at grfcpa.com, nslp.com, and exitreadiness.com. When establishing, if you establish an account at exitreadiness.com and use the coupon code podcast, when you purchase a product, you'll get a 10% discount for being a listener. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. Until next time on the Exit Readiness podcast, this is Pat Ennis, Walter Dial, and Corby McGordon signing off.